Hi, I'm Brian, the Theoretical Gamer. I'm going to do a review today. Um, I'll start with a story. So, a month or two ago, maybe, I was browsing at my friendly local game store, which is called Game Theory. That the fact that I call myself a theoretical gamer and the store that I go to is called Game Theory, I did not intend that on purpose. That was kind of a weird little, huh, type of thing. But anyway, I'm shopping there, and I notice on the shelf something called Amazing Adventures. I hadn't seen it before. The guy who manages Game Theory, cool guy, he, you know, he stocks all the big sellers. He stocks D&D, he stocks Pathfinder, he stocks everything that sells. But he also likes to poke around and look for things that maybe people haven't thought of, which is cool. And this was one of them. Now I looked through it, and I should preface this by saying that for a couple of weeks I had been playing in an online game with some buddies on Sunday nights, members of the RPG Brigade, and we had been playing a retro clone called Castles and Crusades. Now, which is basically a pretty basic retro clone of old school D&D. And as I'm flipping through Amazing Adventures, I start to see the resemblance, and I start to realize this is made by the same company. It's made by Troll Lord Games. And then I start to realize that it's made for maximum compatibility with their flagship product, Castles and Crusades. And I'm like, interesting. So I pick it up, and I like it. I like it quite a bit. It's basically designed for pulp adventure, like Raiders of the Lost Ark type, like 30s and 40s, maybe 20s, 30s and 40s, maybe kind of, and it gives a little thing, like you can do literary pulp with the very dark, gloomy, noir shades of gray, or you could do like the over-the-top, crazy action hero serial pulp, that sort of thing. But all in all, okay, let's go through the main book and see what it is. You have you start off with the character classes, and they're very D&D-ish. The Arcanist, which is basically a spellcaster. There are optional rules for making the spellcaster a bit more subtle, a bit more dangerous. Like you might, have to make a pact with dark powers, but the standard rules are basic spellcasting, which is kind of cool if you want to run a Hellboy Atomic Robo style game where like weird science and magic exists and it's all out in the open and nobody thinks it's weird. And so that would be good. An interesting thing, there's one spellcasting class called the Arcanist, but it covers pretty much all the bases. You decide when you create the Arcanist whether you're an intelligence-based, wisdom-based, or charisma-based one. Each one gets a slightly different spell list with some crossovers between them, and they use the same basic spellcasting rules. It's basically, instead of coming up with, well, this is the cleric, and this is the sorcerer, and this is the wizard, they simplified it and said Arcanist. You get to decide whether you're the smart Arcanist, wise Arcanist, or smooth Arcanist. It's up to you. Pretty cool. It has some here's some weird things. You have the standard 9 levels of spells, and you have the cantrips, but then they also mix it with magic energy points. You prepare a certain amount of spells per day, and then you spend magic points to go pew 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 to fire them off. It's a weird mixture between the normal Vancian magic and magic energy point type things but this is the weird thing. And it's just a tiny little thing that I don't understand, and maybe if the author of the game, Jason Vey, is watching, he can explain to me the reasoning behind this. It's the amount that you pay is the spell level plus 1, which means the 0 level cantrips cost a point to cast. The 9th level spell costs 10 points to cast. Okay, first of all, why not it's just an odd little piece of math that you do every time you cast a spell. Not hard math, But there. I mean, you could have made 0 level cantrips free. Or you could have made 0 level, first level, and let the levels go up to 10. But that's for some reason, I guess it's a D&D cultural meme. It doesn't feel right to have 10 spell levels. 0 level doesn't really count for some reason. But whatever. It just seems weird to have that little +1 in there. But whatever. Then there's the Gadgeteer. The Gadgeteer is basically what it sounds like. He's like the rocket, the rocket man who, with the big rocket propelled thing, or he's the guy with the weird ray gun. And you can choose 2 types of Gadgeteers. Intelligence-based or charisma-based. Intelligence-based is basically what you imagine. You're a genius who creates cool swag to carry on adventures. The charisma-based guy basically means he has a buddy who builds him cool swag. And you'd think that, well, why would I do it? Well, why would I do that? The charisma-based one, his points, when he buys his cool swag, he gets more bang for his buck. He gets more cool swag. But he has the downside of he has to maintain relationships with the NPC, who, let's be honest, if you have a good game master, that just adds to the game. But we all have that fear that, we're going to get with a bad game master who's like, you'd be like, okay, let's start the adventure. Your mentor dies. Now you will never get any more cool stuff, ever. That sort of, yeah. But, again, if you have a cool game master, you're good. And the way that there is no gadget list. There is a thing, basically you spend points to adapt spells, like arcana spells, and turn them into gadgets. And it does take a certain degree of back and forth with the game master. You might need to tweak something and make it work. But it's one of those things that people who like clearly defined powers are kind of going to be bugged by the Gadgeteer. Because you kind of got to work it out for yourself what you are and aren't capable of. But if you like that kind of squirreliness, if you like that kind of, if you like that kind of room for creativity and personalization, it's great. Interesting thing, one of the core classes, there is the Amazing Adventures Companion, which gives you all sorts of cool, and also in addition to which, the Amazing Adventures, The Book of Powers, which is, they both give rules on if you want to create characters with superpowers. And weirdly enough, they just use variations on the Gadgeteer rules, that instead of building gadgets, you use the charisma-based thing and give yourself superpowers. And, there's certain other balance things. You lose certain abilities, but blah. But beyond that, it's like if you want to have a superpowers game, it does give optional rules for that. The next one is the Gumshoe. That's your hard-boiled detective. You could also use it for an ace reporter type. Right? And they've got all kinds of cool abilities and, like that. It's no real powers or anything. Just lots and lots of cool detective-y skills. Pretty awesome. Then there's the Hooligan. The Hooligan is basically the thief character, the rogue. They're the ones that have all the kind of sneaky abilities, the ones that they got the backstab. I like one interesting thing that they did with the backstab was instead of having it, you had back attack, which was basically what you imagine as the backstab ability. But then you get another ability called sneak attack at 4th level, which is really just advanced back attack. You don't literally have to be behind them. You just have to surprise the hell out of them. Okay, then, the next one, the Mentalist. The Mentalist is your basic shadow who knows what evil lurks in the minds of men. The shadow knows. That sort of thing. And they're the ones with the kick-ass psychic abilities. And they have their own separate powers list. It's pretty, unlike the Gadgeteer, it's more like the Arcanist, but it's pretty well defined. The powers, they get less powers than, say, the Spellcaster, but the powers are much more clear, broad. They're much more broad, and and they're much more very, very psychic feel to them. Okay, the next one is the Pugilist. The Pugilist is basically the punchy guy. It's like, if you want, it's the closest thing this game has is to a true fighter. And they're basically, they could be a boxer, they could be a martial artist, they could be like Kanin, Kung Fu, that sort of thing. And, however you want to define it. Then there's one, you gotta love the title, the Raider, in case there's any lost arcs lying around. And it's basically your intelligent, educated explorer. The person who goes out into the world and explores and, goes into temples and runs away from giant rolling boulders and stuff like that. And finally is the Socialite. The Socialite is basically the face character. They basically have powers like charm and fascinate and things that are normally considered spells, but in this case, when you use your charm on someone, you're actually being charming, right? And that's basically all the classes. But in the Companion, it gives you a few more. And these are a little odder. They're much less geared toward pulp. Some of them are more fantasy, or some of them are more oddly, like the Acrobat, the Archer, the Duelist, and I think a lot of these were taken kind of from, like I said, a lot of it was from Castles and Crusades. There's the Duelist. There's the Feral, which is your kind of raised in the jungle Tarzan character. The Gunslinger, your basic gun guy. The Pirate, and the Soldier. Some of these could very much be pulp, and some of them aren't. And the reason some of these don't feel very pulpy, but it doesn't really matter, because the thing about this game is that it not only allows but encourages multi-classing. So you could just be a straight up like Gumshoe, or you could double class as a Gumshoe hooligan who plays that detective who is very sneaky and breaking and entering on the wrong side of the law half the time type of guy. Pretty cool. There are limitations. You can't be an Arcanist Mentalist. If you are a powered character in a sense, you can't double up. And that includes Gadgeteer. You can't be an Arcanist Gadgeteer, Gadgeteer Mentalist. And also they do mention, because there's always that one guy who thinks he's clever, you can't be an Arcanist. Like, can I play an intelligence-based Arcanist and a wisdom-based Arcanist at the same time? No, you cannot. It says so. You can do the single class, in which case you follow the normal progression in experience points ranks. You do the dual class, which means you have to do math. They didn't figure out the experience point progressions for every class. What they do is they figure out, in order to reach X level in each double class, you take the two, you add them together, and then you add a certain extra amount to pay for the right to double class, like an extra 100 or so. I'll have to look it up, but an extra 100 or so, an extra 200 per current level. So it would be, you would add the basically total the two amounts, add 200 per your current level, and that's basically it. But there's also an interesting variation on that called class and a half, which basically means if you wanted to play a Gumshoe Arcanist, right, you could be an Arcanist who had some detective abilities on the side, and that would be, Arcanist would be your primary. Or maybe you could be a detective who just knows a few spells, which means Gumshoe would be your primary. Then what it works is you would start off as a you would start off as first level in your first class and 0 level in the other, which would give you some of their abilities, but you wouldn't get them you would get them roughly at 0 level. You would be behind even a first level character. And then you would go up, and once you were 10th level in Gumshoe, you would be 5th level in Arcanist. That is an interesting idea. And again, you have to do the math, right? Which sucks for people. All gamers are smart. Just ask them. But the ones that are gamer smart, like too smart to, do math and other thinking things, There's I could go into all the cool rule stuff. There are some interesting ideas, like the fact, like armor class. They have armor class, but since pulp heroes generally don't load up on their plate mail like the heroes you're used to, they came up with something interesting. They combined armor class with the rule of cool, right? Which basically means you get increased armor class by wearing cool ass pulp stuff, like a trench coat or a scarf or or something like a fedora or anything that fits the period or fits your character. If you describe your character looking especially period appropriate or cool, you get a bonus to armor class, usually +1, +2, or +3 depending. And it makes sense. You go watch the Marvel Agent Carter series. You see, Haley Atwell playing Peggy Carter. You see Peggy Carter wearing just a normal blouse and a skirt. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. But then you see her in cool-ass military uniform. Hell yeah. You see her in a fedora. Hell yeah. You give her armor class for that. I know it's silly, but it's one of those fun ideas. There's also generic abilities that anyone can get if you're willing to swap out powers from your core class. Like one of your powers or skills that you get for the core class, you can swap them out for this list of generic abilities, which allows you to customize the class. Because sometimes you have powers that you don't think you'll want or don't think you'll use, but and then one thing about the Castles and Crusade Amazing Adventures system, what they call it the siege engine. Cute. The siege engine is that it's very, very low on skills. The idea is if you do something, generally speaking, you make an attribute roll. They took the skills largely out of it and based it on attribute rolls. They figured that these are your attributes, use them for something. Like something, well, that's a strength roll, that's an intelligence roll, that's blah, 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 It basically gives a character who's just generally good at a lot of stuff if you have the stats. But then you can also choose something called character backgrounds. So if you say that your character was a former stage magician, right, or he was a stage magician, he would get like a +2 bonus on his dexterity rolls if he was doing sleight of hand or pulling coins out of children's ears, stuff like that. Then you have knowledge rolls, which are more specific but give you +3 on a specific knowledge, stuff like that. Okay, next. This is another central thing about the Siege Engine thing, and I thought it was odd when we were playing Castles and Crusades, and it's still odd in Amazing Adventures. Is you get your 6 stats. It's D&D basically. It's a retro clone. Strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. But then you choose, I think 3 of them or 2 or 3 of them. You choose 3 of them, I think, to be primary, and 3 to be secondary, right? And so when you make a roll, the base thing that you have to get is 18 if it's a secondary stat, 12 if it's a primary stat. I don't know exactly how I feel about that. It's like, this is going to sound like a very bizarre and tangential comparison, but in the old World of Darkness, you would have X amount of dots in your stat plus skill, and you would roll a certain amount. In the new World of Darkness, it was a standard target number of 8. You have to get 8 or above, and you re-roll 10s, and you have to get X amount of successes. And that was very straightforward. But the original World of Darkness, the target number was usually 7, but it could go up or down, which added a new axis of figuring out the probability. So you kind of had to be a bit of I'm not a statistician. Like, well, what does that number of dots mean if I don't know, well, it's like that. If you have a 15 in strength and a 15 in intelligence, and intelligence is a primary and strength is a secondary, those 15s don't mean the same thing. In fact, your intelligence is much higher than your strength. It adds a squirrely dimension to what your stats actually mean. And, also I think that you add your level to rolls, which is interesting at the first level, but once your character gets really high level, it means you're going to be succeeding at a lot of stuff very, very often. Which, like succeeding at practically everything very, very often. Which I suppose is good for pulp heroes. Pulp heroes tend to be, obnoxiously good at a lot of things. But, again, it's not the most perfect system, but it's simple, and overall I think I kind of like it. Now, the guy, Jason Vey, that's his name right there, Jason Vey, he added a lot of optional rules. And let's be honest, this is a retro clone based on D&D. And so, yeah, give up trying to pretend you're being original. So, yeah, he basically borrowed, like, rule ideas and systems from all sorts of other things. Like, he borrowed sanity rules. If you wanted to play a particularly dark, grim pulp. If you're playing, over-the-top heroic, he even says it's very, very optional. But yeah, it's the sanity rules from Call of Cthulhu adapted to this. You lose a certain amount of sanity, you get temporary short-term, long-term, or indefinite insanities. If your sanity score hits 0, you're like forever, and that sort of thing. But there's a reputation thing. There's a wealth score, which depends on your class. The wealth these are optional rules. Wealth is optional, but it's one of those things that it tacks right on or off, and you could add wealth rules mid-campaign. Yeah, let's use the wealth rules like 3 adventures in, and it won't change anything. It just basically says based on your effectively wealth becomes a stat that gives you bonuses or penalties to buy things. Because it's pulp. You don't want to. It's not like a D&D or Castles and Crusades setting where you have to keep track of every copper piece, right? I think if I have one major concern with this game is that it feels like D&D. And I think that, like I said, Castles and Crusades is their flagship product, and they really liked the idea of having maximum compatibility. So once you get to the spell list, you're like, yeah, I'm reading D&D. This is a D&D game. They have Charm Person or Animal. They have Prismatic Sphere and Spray. They have Polymorph spells. It's a D&D spell list, right? Which, honestly, if you've played a lot of D&D and that's all you've mostly ever played, then familiarity is a good thing. It's nice to have a certain degree of familiarity. There are fate points which allow you to fudge the plot, and you start off with a certain amount of fate points, and you get more per level, which it lets you boost die rolls and fudge the plot and do all sorts of heroic things, which is very good for a pulp adventure. All in all, it seems pretty cool and interesting, and I would recommend that. And I talked about it to the guys in my Sunday night group, and they all seem to think that it was kind of a cool idea. I don't know if it's like, I don't know if I'd run it, but I might, who knows. There's sections on secret societies, there's monsters. But let's be honest, like I said, again, it's for a pulp game, it's very D&D. Like the one book that they have is, they have their version of the monster manual, which is called The Manual of Monsters. So they're not trying to be overly original. It's and a lot of the monsters are very D&D monsters. They've got and they've got lots of there, and some of them are, and some of them aren't. But in that, then in the back they have sections for mythological monsters, and they even have a section, a little like 1 or 2 page section, 2 pages on monsters as player characters, because there's always that one guy who wants to play a snowflake character, and they even say we recommend you don't because we want the monsters to seem like monsters. And but it seems to be borrowed from the old third edition idea of playing monsters, where you have to start off as a monster, buy a low powered monster, buy up your hit dice until you reach the normal monster level of hit dice, and then multi-class over into a standard class, which is you know you know all in all, it's a really cool game. It's got pretty decent artwork. Um, it's over. There's even a few adventures out for it. Um, I think I've pretty much said all I gotta say. It's got its good points. It's got its bad points that I'm a little weary about, but a little wary about. But all in all, it looks like it would be a lot of fun. It's your basic D&D level game, but with a very pulp feel to it, and that should be it. That's my review. Thank you very much. Out.